I see the record button up, so you're on.
Yes, sir.
All right, y'all ready? I would like to call the May 25th, 21st, 2020 meeting of the City of Charleston Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee to order. And although we are distanced, we're all together and ask that we, as we traditionally do, begin with a moment of silence, please. Thank you. All right, so y'all got an agenda which is awfully short. The first is the election of a vice chair. We'll then get to public comment and talk about our open street discussion. Before we get going, let me just tell you all on the committee why this meeting came to pass when it did. We had a Traffic and Transportation Committee meeting before City Council. When was it? Last week, Keith. And during that time, there was lots of discussions about what the city looks like both today and in the future in multimodalism, on using some space that would traditionally be car space for other things. There were lots of suggestions that were out there, some of them general, some more specific. And Councilmember Brady made the suggestion that we bring the discussion to this committee, which was a very popular suggestion, so popular it passed unanimously. So my understanding, and Carl, jump in if I say something that's, or Keith, that you don't think is right. The Traffic and Transportation Committee sent to this committee a discussion of, I guess, basically anything when it comes to our streets, open streets, multimodalism, making some changes along the way, both short and long term, and was looking for a report back on any suggestions or recommendations that we had within a 60-day time frame. Is that right? That's right. So we really have a blank canvas here tonight and going forward. And I'm hoping that we can direct some of the conversation. Alan Davis is kind enough to join us from our Civic Design Center. He's going to give us some thoughts and I think share with us some renderings that he's done. I think Mr. Benjamin has some thoughts that he wants to talk about, just sort of about the process of how we go about taking back all our parts of our streets from cars to other modes of transportation. So we'll try to make this as structured as we can. All ideas are welcomed. And I can tell you, I don't think that there is a whole lot of preconceived notions back at City Council about what the future looks like. I do think we have an incredible opportunity right now to make some incremental changes for the better, both short, again, and long term. So let's take that to heart. So with that said, Keith, do we want to elect the vice chairman tonight, or do we want to wait till we meet in person to do that, which would be my preference, by the way?
I'll yield to both co-chairs.
So, Matt, if you don't mind, I'd like to move to defer the election of a vice chair so we can all be in a room together and talk about sort of the structure of this committee, introduce ourselves to each other in person, and go through that. Is there any objection to that, Matt?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Do we need a motion for that?
I think we can just defer it by acclamation.
Unanimous consent.
Yep. So if there's no objection, I would just ask that we put on our first meeting together the election of a vice chair. Okay. All right. Next on our agenda is public comment. I guess this is a publicly noticed meeting. I don't know if there's anybody on the line that wants to make public comment, but I think Mr. Benjamin got some public comments that he's going to share with us. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We sent out notifications specifically allowing people to both call in and email in comments. We got two emailed comments in. Just going to paraphrase what they have here. One is from Charles Fox, who messaged in specifically regarding the Cosgrove Bridge and requesting that there be a large lane for cyclists and pedestrians. He also requested that there be an SEDOT engineering study to be funded to determine the cost and design for an accessible path over the river. Just also brought up how much longer of a bike commute it is for him to get back and forth to work because that connection is not there. Also got one from Alex Pappas. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly.
Alex Pappas.
Yes, sir. And specifically asking for opening the streets on King Street from Spring to Broad a 24/7 lockout, did make mention of particular sections possibly being closed for certain hours, and also made mention of Cumming Street two-way and requesting that that be a part of consideration as well. Those are the two public comments.
Can you share those comments with the committee if you haven't already done so?
Yes, sir. I will make that note.
Thank you. Particularly Mr. Pappas, Dr. Pappas. I'd like to see what he has to say. Okay. I don't think there's anybody who's tuned in. If there's anybody who's tuned in who would like to make public comment, I guess you could share via chat that you would like to do so, and we can open you up. Although I think we do it anyway. I don't see anybody. Okay.
I had a question. I'm sorry. I had a
Sure,
question.
please.
Appropriate. Hello, everyone. My name is Najima Washington. I'm just joining this committee, but I wanted to inquire, because this is my first large meeting with all of you, accessibility. Since we had to pivot here, I don't know to what degree the public was going to be able to participate, but certainly, and this is something we might be able to address at the end of the meeting, if people aren't able to participate in the way they had intended, whether it be Zoom or YouTube or whatever, that we make it possible for them to make additional comments, or that we don't maybe make final recommendations or decisions on things until everyone gets a chance to comment. So I'll mute myself now.
So I'll field that just really quickly. So traditionally it's city council on our standing committees, and we are one of them. We are a sanctioned committee. We don't even have public comment. This is, I think, the only one that as a committee we have unanimously from day one invited and welcomed public comment, and we like it. It's been very successful. What we've done in this challenging age is we've noticed these meetings and we do open them up for public comment, and we give people options. They can in advance send us their comments and we publish them just as Mr. Benjamin did. You can also join the meeting and then through chat or otherwise let us know you're there and comment. We will continue to do it that way. And in the interim, if there are people who need to get a hold of us, you've got two sitting city council members that are on this committee, that are on the TNT committee. So through the work that we do, there's plenty of access to us. We're not going to hold up any of the work we're doing, particularly on what we're about to get into, I don't think, but again, it's up to the committee for more than 60 days because council wants to hear back from us. But I do think that's plenty of time for people to comment, and we will try to publish, and we're going to have a report of this meeting at our next TNT meeting. So we'll publish to the public what we're doing. So we'll give them plenty of opportunity. A lot easier, obviously, when we're in person. But for now, we're, I think, doing the best we can with the resources we have.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's great that that's how it's run, but we've had a disruption. So it's just a little bit different for people to access.
Yeah, well, look, I'm looking forward to us all being together so we can introduce ourselves in person. It's a strange time in which we are living, but we'll do the best we can. So, any other questions? Yes, Ms. Zimmerman.
Since Mr. Fox wrote in about the Cosgrove Bridge, the North Bridge, I can give you an update on what's going on there briefly. We're hoping to get on a county council agenda in July to have council vote to update the study to figure out access over that bridge. So we've already Charleston Moves has been working with county staff to lay out the scope of that updated study. And the staff has received a cost estimate and they are ready to move forward in July when county council has stopped dealing with emergency things and can get back into non-emergency things.
Great. Helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Unless there's anybody else in the public through via chat or otherwise, I'm going to close the public comment period for now, but we'll be back next time. So now let's talk about the open street concept discussion. Mr. Benjamin, I'm going to let you kick it off. And then I know, Alan, do you have a presentation you want to make to us? Is that how this is going to work?
I am going to lay out some stuff for everybody. One of the things I will highlight in there is the work that Alan has been up to. So if the conversation goes in that direction of wanting to talk about that specific corridor, he and his folk have studied that backwards and forward. So we can definitely speak to that and get into that detail if the committee begins to talk about that corridor as one of the potential areas.
Okay. Well, let's see how this goes. And as always, any committee member who has a question, just chime on in. All right, Mr. Benjamin, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Yes, sir. So I'm going to share my screen. Y'all let me know that you can see it.
Much like the work we're about to do, it's a blank slate. There we go.
All right.
Perfect.
Good to go. So want to just give an outline, not just about open streets, but within the context of Charleston. Obviously been receiving a bunch of different emails about the last about 4 weeks ago into thesis mode. So thank you. Literally reading the minutes from 1967, 1971. But I want to make sure everybody's on the same page and has as much information as possible. And I'll share the pedestrian local rate as you need to. I really like this definition of open streets that comes from the Open Streets Project, and they've been doing a lot of amazing work, specifically because I think it contextualizes what the opportunity is in a way that makes sure that everybody gets to be a part of the conversation and what exactly it looks like. I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind as you all do your deliberation tonight is the perspective that council is coming from. And so as long as you all are making sure there's a contextualization for everybody to be a part of whatever you decide to make recommendations of, that's thinking about social integration, that's thinking about connection of neighborhoods, that's thinking about people meeting in the street as equals, I think we start checking that box. Part of where the ask of this open streets opportunity comes from, not just from the stakeholders, but internal conversations we've had as city staff is in regards to how hard our small businesses, food and beverage businesses have been hit. They've been hit in a significant way. And so there's been a significant conversation from our council about how do we help these businesses come back? How do we make sure that the general public feels safe to interact and to shop and to eat and to walk and to bike and to interact and otherwise? And so as you all are deliberating, keeping that objective in mind, that council is specifically interested in how they're bringing back the city, how we're uplifting these small businesses and what that opportunity is and how Open Streets helps to answer that question. One of the things that I think is extremely important to highlight as we talk and as we deliberate is that this isn't a new conversation for us in Charleston, not just about the King Street corridor, but all throughout the city. As far back as 1947, as they were building all those highways, the equivalent of the secretary, the state secretary of the DOT, spoke about what King Street could possibly look like, especially for pedestrian access. You have studies from our chamber that looked at a pedestrian mall of sorts for the lower King Street corridor, even the commitment of Green Street and College Street that actually used to be streets that now are pedestrian ways. You have the 1994 tourism managed plan that one of its recommendations specifically said to couple vehicular traffic in the market area. And even our Calhoun West studies spoke about the potential of Concord Street in the future as development comes in there and how that could function for non-motorized use. So I think it's important to make that establishment that this is not a new discussion for us, right? It's something we've been wrestling with for some time. One of the other things to just make you all aware of is that we're not the only city who's trying to navigate this and figure out what fits for us in terms of how do we get out of COVID-19, how we support businesses and otherwise. There's been some amazing work. We're a National Association of City Transportation Officials, city, and so we've been a part of a number of conversations that have been happening, and there's been an aggregation of all the work that cities have been doing globally. That Smart Growth America, NACTO, Street Mix, and the University of North Carolina have put together. The picture you see is of Winter Park, Florida, and I'll talk about them in a second. But cities have been wrestling with what this looks like. How does this function? How does it work for our city versus another? And so hopefully you all can be able to dig into that today. Councilmember Brady asked me to give some city examples. that have introduced some form of open streets. And specifically, he said to introduce cities that are close in size and population like ours. I think that's important because I'll tell you from the national conversation, many of the cities that are being put on a pedestal for doing the quote unquote right thing about open streets are large cities that own all of their streets, that bond their transportation revenue, et cetera, et cetera. That's not our case, right? And so what does that look like for cities that have some similarities to ours? One of the other things that I want to stress to you all, and I know I'm not reading the slides, I'm not a reader of slides, but I want to give you a sense of what's happening, is that many cities have crafted what open streets means for them in varying different ways. Winter Park, Florida, that I showed you all earlier, they decided to just do their open streets just on Mother's Day weekend. Hoboken, an amazing city, amazing mayor there. They're just doing Saturdays and Sundays, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And even in Tampa, who I'll show their piece in a second, they've limited theirs just to a 2-week time period in the evenings. And so the variation of what can be done, how that looks for us, I think there's some openness in that regard. And just wanting to make that you aware that it's not a kind of either or situation. It's what fits for us, what fits for Charleston. Can't take credit for this one. This is from Studio 111. Just wanting to give people a visual of the different varying options that come up around open streets. Everything from temporary parklets to permanent parklet space to curbside pickup to slow streets where only the residential traffic is allowed on the street, not throughway, so people can begin to occupy the right of way. There's a number of different pieces that can go into open streets that are not just specific to closing the public right of way. Obviously, that's an option too. So I'm not saying that that's off the table, but just wanting to make sure we know that there's all sorts of combinations that can come into play, and your thoughts as you're thinking about recommendations, being conscious of that. We've obviously been doing a number of different things in the city as well, and I don't want to skip over those. You know, there's some ordinance relief that we've done around our sidewalking furniture, our curbside pickup, and otherwise automating pedestrian buttons. The picture that you see is from Hampton Park, and that gray ugly looking box is actually an eco counter that we've had out there since May 7th, and really seen an amazing outpouring of response of people to the expanded hours and days of Hampton Park closing to vehicular traffic. I'm going to give you these numbers, and these numbers include the percentage you take off from double counts according to USDOT data. So these are real numbers. So our total since May 7th is over 30,000 users. Our daily average exceeds 2,000. Our weekly average exceeds 15,000, and our projected monthly average of use would be over 65,000. So just a massive amount of response that has come from the expansion of the closure of the Hampton Park area, and I'm just excited to keep continuing to see what those numbers look like and break those down. So I mentioned earlier the amount of emails that I have gotten and calls and tweets and DMs and otherwise, and a number of them have raised many different areas of potential for some form of open streets and what exactly that could look like. And I wanted to list these out for you all so you have a place of reference as you're having your conversations. Obviously, most of the conversation you've heard about is somewhere along King Street, whether that's the southern portion of King Street, expanding sidewalk space, or the upper portion of King Street, where I'll show some diagrams later, the work that Alan and his team have looked at areas near the College of Charleston along Cumming Street and St. Philip, parking lanes around Colonial Lake, parking areas stretching out the sidewalk area along the Battery, along Murray Boulevard, Market Street, East Bay Street, and then also off the peninsula in the Magnolia area off of US 17. These are all different areas that have come to me many a times from different stakeholders asking about the potential of open streets and what that can look like. So just wanted to lay those out for you. Now, I want to just kind of showcase you visuals of examples of what this potentially could look like. I think, you know, I learned by pictures, so I know some people do too. So just want to go through these real quick. I mentioned Tampa earlier, the 14 days that they're doing of curbside access. of their open streets, of parklets and otherwise. They have dug deep into the detail of design, outreach and otherwise to execute their project, even literally showing like diagrams here, how many feet apart different seating areas have to be, how they protect in the public right of way and otherwise. One of the key factors in Tampa, and I'll mention this even later, but is that they chose not to use SCD, their state DOT streets. Now I know that's a hard aspect for us because the vast majority of our business aspects are on those. But that's a key factor in how they were able to execute their piece. They chose only city and county streets, and I don't want to skip over that aspect of how they were able to be effective.
That would be hard for us, by the way.
I know. That's why I'm laying it all out there for
All
everybody.
right.
The Greenway, I think, is an amazing example of not just now in terms of tactical urbanism, but the potential of what it can be in the future of an open streets concept that's in our city, that's active and been doing some amazing things. A right-of-way that the city owned, Dowdy Street, that still allows access to parking, access to main arterials, but has taken up space for seating, for eating, for being able to make sure folk can simply gather, and been able to maintain the public safety access, the 20 feet of right of way for the public safety access. And then
We see this in Miami too.
Yes, but along the Ocean Drive, yes.
Yeah.
And then the concept that we've been hinting at before, that Alan and his team have taken a look at, they did some really in-depth analysis of the best practices from Second Sunday, and put some extra on that, and really kind of thought about what the Upper King Street corridor could potentially look like if that had some street closures there. One of the pieces that I think is important that is showcased in their work, and if you all at your deliberation decide that this is one of the areas to discuss, I'll let him dig into more, is this question of, well, if we close down the streets, that means that vehicular traffic won't be able to move, right? That there will be no access and otherwise. And they took a look at that, right? To think about how you can have on-street retail focused areas and storefronts that are still accessing the public right of way, but still have that east-west connection. For example, in the diagram that you see on Morris and Mary, where vehicular traffic would still be able to get to the main corridor of Meeting Street, still be able to use the two-way traffic on Cannon or Spring Street, but still you're able to have those type of open street functions in their way. Greenville actually is in the midst of doing this right now on their Main Street corridor, and seeing how that works for them. So just some keys to success that I think are important. I have to be straight with y'all and say that for the cities that have been introducing open streets efforts even before COVID-19, there's a lot of work that they've put into making those effective, let alone adding COVID-19 into it. And so I'm not going to run through all of these, but I want you to see for yourself the different aspects that go into some of the cities that we've seen that have been able to execute on success. We've already talked about roadway ownership, but another piece of that is the traffic management. We have CPD on the line who can talk about that more, but that's a capacity piece of being able to make sure that people are safe. If you all make a decision for example, partial closures or for parklets or otherwise, especially on DOT right of way, there's some aspects of traffic safety that will rise to the top immediately that would have to be considered to get approval. SCDOT views this as an opportunity. They have not said no to open streets concepts, but they have categorized it the same way that they categorize parades and festivals. And so the same evaluations that they put on traffic management and safety for those type of events, they would be putting on this type of initiative as well. This is an aspect that I can't skip over. I have to make sure we're conscious of this. And that's, if we're going to be thinking about open streets, we have to be thinking about it through an equity lens, right? How are we making sure that those who need ADA access. What exactly does that look like? What does open streets look like for them? How are we defining enforcement, right? To put out, hey, we want area where folk can jog, folk can run, folk can ride their bike. Well, the truth of the matter is, for some, that's a dangerous endeavor to choose. Really been thankful for the leadership of Chief Reynolds and during COVID-19, and really taking the lead and saying, we're going to move forward with education and engagement as we help citizens, as we help businesses navigate through this COVID-19 time. Workforce transit dependency. We have to keep in mind that 70% of our transit riders make $45,000 or less. And about the same percentage of them don't own a car. So they walk or bike to their transit stop. So as we're saying open streets concepts, what does it mean for them to be able to get to that job that we're expecting to be able to open up into the public right of way, right? What does that mean for the hop? What does that mean for the dash? What does that mean for the 20? For them to be able to get to their essential service. And then obviously the bike ped safety thing. We're still the #1 city for bike ped safety, death and injuries. 43% of them are African American. So we just got to make sure that as we're talking about the open streets concept, that we're not excusing the equity conversation. I hinted at this earlier, but if you, as you all are thinking about your recommendations and what moves forward, I want you to also keep in mind that you're talking about an initiative that will have to be a top city priority. It's not going to be a initiative that would sit just with the Department of Traffic and Transportation. It would have to be a collaborative effort amongst a number of different departments, at least the six here, not including our budget and finance and also our legal team. But just making sure that we're doing it right, doing it safe, and doing it in a way that makes sense. So it would be a top city, it would have to be a top city priority that a number of these departments would have to come together to execute. So just some things to ponder, and then I'll shut up. One, being conscious of the fact that these open streets ideas need to be in the context, at least for council, with how we're bringing the city back, with how we're supporting small businesses, how we're supporting food and beverage businesses, and otherwise. Remembering that partial closures mean an increased need for design, because you're talking about continuing to have vehicular traffic in that right of way. If you have partial closures, what does that safety aspect mean? Closures on SCDOT right of way are temporary because they're viewing them as in the same vein as parades or festivals. And that open streets are going to require all hands on deck, including all of you. So I know I went through that extremely quickly, but I wanted to kind of lay a foundation for your conversation, some perspective from the city, and what this possibly could look like. So thank y'all for bearing with me.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so now we don't really have a playbook. We've been charged with having a conversation that may lead to some recommendations back to council. I think a couple of things that Mr. Benjamin touched on, I just want to echo, and then I'm going to give Councilmember Brady a chance to weigh in a little bit, and then we'll get our discussion going. And that is this: in the 2 months since we've shut things down, and in the backside of this, as we begin to open things up, the common themes around the city, particularly at the elected official level, has been, what can we do to open the city back up in a way that helps small business, and that in a way that perhaps tries some things that we haven't tried before, but are implementable. I think those are fair comments on what we've heard. And again, as we rethink what the city looks like as we come back on the backside of this, particularly when it comes to mobility and transportation, I think there is, for the first time since I've sat on council, which is 11 years, a stomach to try some things that are different. But I would just tell you this cautionary tale, and that is this: Hampton Park, which to me has always been the lowest of low-hanging fruits that are out there. We, 7 years ago, had a debate that lasted 200 hours to take away one lane. We then, when we closed the parks, thought it to be a good idea, and believe it or not, by ordinance, but by mistake, closed down the lanes at Hampton Park. The language that was put in the ordinance that was adopted, and then the ultimate decree from the mayor, was put in without anybody's knowledge. It was great, but then it was backed off of. I mean, we're now not closed all the time. So there is, even in the easiest, what seems to be of areas to do some of the things I think at least some of us like to do, there's a lot of conversation, both pro and con, and I will say this and then shut up and hand it over to Councilmember Brady for a second. I was on a talk show this morning on AM radio, and the caller called in about Hampton Park and could not have been more against shutting it down. It was painfully against. So that's the kind of stuff that's out there. This committee, I think, has an opportunity that no one has ever in the city had before to come forward with some thoughtful, thought-provoking, substantive suggestions to a city and a council that can get adopted and change things, both small and medium and large, forever if we do it right. We don't have to do it all tonight. In fact, we're not going to do it all tonight, but we do have a charge to be back with council within 60 days with some recommendations. My suggestion is that the recommendations aren't do nothing. So if they're not do nothing, it's going to be something. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Brady, and then we'll turn it back to you all, and let's see where this all goes.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So, one of the things, and I had talked to Keith a little bit, but if you've ever studied pandemics, looking at like 1918, the 2 instances of the Black Plague, pandemics don't break things; they illuminate things that are already broken. And so, it was one of those things when we were talking about it at Traffic and Transportation that kind of popped into my mind as we talked about how to get the businesses back up and re-going, was this opportunity for, and I know in talking to Katie and whatnot as well, that, we prioritized cars for so long that the pandemic has illuminated that only focusing on that, could be to our detriment in terms of, in this instance, trying to provide some temporary relief, at least for businesses. And so, this is an opportunity that we finally have at the confluence of the right time and the right moment to really bring some changes forward that I know council would be willing to consider as well. And rather than have to get an ad hoc committee or anything together, it was my suggestion, as Councilmember Seekings had said, that we really utilize this committee, which has a broad cross-section of the community represented, and various viewpoints that can come together and provide some actual concrete recommendations that we can then take to council. And it was kind of instead of it being just a top-down, those of us on council just kind of dictating it, this was seen as the opportunity to have citizen involvement in the form of this committee, and then be able to kind of bottom up bring those suggestions to council. And so you guys are going to play a very important role in that.
Correct. Kate, Ms. Zimmerman.
Keith, you mentioned DOT has a specific way of how they're looking at these. Can you tell us, did they have material requirements? Did they have time requirements? Did they have law enforcement requirements? What are they specifically expecting to be done?
So they have not, there's not a ruling that they've iterated to me in regards to open streets. They have iterated to me that they view this in the same way as their permit, their ED 28 permit, which is for road closures for parades, festivals, and other events. So that's how they categorize it. And there's specific parameters in that regard that would have to be followed, and predominant around it is the involvement of law enforcement, and also about traffic diversion plans and otherwise. So it's a 2-page document. There's not really much specificity in regards to open streets about the type of materials and otherwise. They might yield to, to municipality in that regard. But that's kind of how they've categorized the potential of it. And it's still governed, it's still in their hand. If it's in their right of way, it's still in their hands to decide whether yay or nay. I think the thing that was encouraging is that when I asked, it wasn't a carte blanche no. It was, well, this is the category we would place it in for review for what would happen there. So I have yet to get a no to the idea of what things could look like. I do know if, for example, if there's partial closures and you all decide that you want to do parklets, there's going to be, if it's in their right of way, there's going to be strict guidelines about the level of impact that can be taken by the material that's put in that parklet, for example, which to me speaks towards something more permanent than a tactical urbanism project.
I think the key word, Katie, that comes from all that 2-page guideline is temporary. They're looking for things that are temporary. That's why they put it in the category. But that's okay. I mean, what they call temporary, we can call pilot. We can do all sorts of things. But at least we know that there's a starting point that we can jump off of that we haven't gotten to know. I think that they'll be somewhat flexible, particularly downtown, where we have some more opportunity anyway.
I will say the cities that we spoke to, these projects were led by their state DOT. So just to sort of put it in perspective, I would hope we would be able to sort of point to the fact that outside of South Carolina, their states are leading on these things.
Well, the good news is you've now taken a step up and a step above the DOT because we're going to lead this.
I think that's great. That is very encouraging. Katie, thank you so much for the materials that you sent over. It was great to get such an in-depth summary. Are you still a student? Because I feel like I should still be a student. I mean, I know you're not, but I mean, like, you obviously are in that you're doing this data analysis, and it's in the numbers. Councilman Seekings, I think you said something very noteworthy, that not only could this be a pilot and the possibility of a lot of things, but I like to think of it as a pivot sometimes. And I think Keith has alluded to that in a degree. And Keith, thank you for that summary. I really took some good notes on how to put together a good presentation. I had never heard it like that. You learn through pictures. And I have teachers for parents. I got a lot of harsh words instead. Sorry. All with love. The other thing that I wanted to say was, you know, there were a lot of great ideas. We've seen things from other cities. We've seen things, we can look internationally, but also one of the strengths here is that we have so many examples in town. So, you know, and specifically from the lens of this being a permits and event type of regulation, then we definitely have a lot of examples. You know, I myself being down at the College of Charleston, you know, now obviously that's an enclosed, you know, in particular area, but I just feel like, yes, this is an incredible opportunity, and to pivot, to pilot, and to test and to highlight what's already been great in the city.
All those, I think all those are good points. Go ahead.
The other thing I just wanted to note from the other cities that we spoke to, all of them are, I like, Najima, your use of pivot, and it's like a constant feedback loop for them right now. You know, they started these projects, but depending on the feedback they get, they're tweaking as they're working through it. So I think it was New York, they did it on a block. One business owner had some concerns, so they shifted it so that business owner didn't have to deal with it anymore. You know, law enforcement is patrolling their usual beats, but they're not stationed on site staring. And again, in New York City, they found when the police started by just stationing themselves there, it made the community uncomfortable. It wasn't a community when they had police officers just standing there. Mm-hmm. So there are different ways. I know we have to do the whole, you know, Charleston's unique in every possible way, but we can learn from our own folks as we're implementing these pilot temporary projects and continuously tweak them based on feedback. And I think that's the most successful way that we're going to be able to do this.
I couldn't agree with you more. Feedback is critical. Was there, did I hear someone else's voice?
And we're going to have to be nimble on this. I do see, just Chairman's prerogative for a second, I do see that Meg Thompson came from behind the screen to in front of the screen. I'm not sure that means she has something to say to us, but I suspect it does. So Meg, I'm going to give you the floor for a sec if you've got something to add to this conversation.
I appreciate that. I was more just trying to make myself available in case people had questions.
Do y'all, by the way, before you start, do y'all know Meg? Meg, introduce yourself really quickly because we have new members of the committee. Meg has a key and vital role in the city, and she can explain it much better than me. So have at it.
So I am the Director of Business and Neighborhood Services for the City of Charleston. My office is part of the planning department, but we're unique in that we're not regulatory. We are very public facing and very engaged. So I have been on the receiving end of those emails along with the council members and Keith about desires for more space, both from residents, from the neighborhood services side of my shop, and a lot from business owners, especially downtown, asking for more space, especially restaurant owners. The caveat to that, I would say, is I have received some emails saying, please don't do that as well, from business owners, from residents. And just want to echo two things that Keith said. We had looked into this previously. Alan's shop had done some great work looking at this specifically on King Street. And what became abundantly clear is that this was going to be very complicated and very complex. This wasn't going to be something that any one department could do on its own, and something that was going to be challenging to balance the needs of everyone in order to execute well. So that's really all I have to say. But thank you for recognizing me, Councilmember. I appreciate it.
And thank you for being part of this because, I mean, Meg and her team is a huge resource, particularly in the community, because like she said, she's forward facing in the community and she really has a finger on the pulse of the small businesses and the residents and what sort of turns them off, turns them on and all that kind of stuff. So it's a resource we're going to have to depend on as we pivot, as we pilot, and as we are, I mean, this is a word that you usually don't talk about in transportation mobility, especially public transit, is being nimble. We're gonna have to be nimble. What works today may not work tomorrow. So we'll have to make sure whatever I sort of envision us sending to council and to TNT a white paper or sort of a list of recommendations. We're gonna have to sort of preface it all by, we recognize that it's gonna have to be revisited fairly regularly, and Meg and her team are gonna be the key to all that to the extent we're gonna be successful.
Yeah, I think my only comment is that feedback loop is essential. That whenever I think about this whole process, it is absolutely the key to doing this because it's going to require a change in perception. And so when we implement, it's going to, I think some of that negativity some of the negativity may turn into positivity, and some of the positivity may turn into negativity. I mean, we don't know. But I think the whole idea of pivoting is that people's perceptions may change when they actually live in that environment of a more spacious outdoor experience in dining or whatever, whatever you're doing. And my hope is that it will be more positive than negative, and that we could then tweak, change, or whatever. And whether we have to change hours, change location. And that is the key, is there's just gonna have to be this constant input of information, and we have to be nimble in making those changes. I mean, the city's going to have to be. That's how it works anywhere else. But I think I went to Atlanta, by the way, on Mother's Day, and I walked the Beltline there, and I had no idea what the Beltline was. A friend told me about it, and I was just aghast. I couldn't believe how wonderful it was.
I lived
and I thought, how does Atlanta have this, and we don't have anything near something like this? And so it changes your perception of what's possible when you actually you're in it, and you see people using it. That kind of a place, an open space.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm exploding because my mind is.
Well, hang on a sec. So we, as a standing committee, we are going to sort of stick to Robert's rules here a second. So I'm going to do these as preliminary comments. Are there any other members of the committee that sort of on preliminarily have any reaction to what's going on here, have any input, and then we'll get around to second round of comments and we'll try to put some focus and some substance to this. And
well, I'd just like to add, if it seems that an iterative process is what we need, can we just go ahead and say, hey, let's do 4 weekends a month? I mean, just decide on something now if we know that's what we need.
No,
that's one less thing we need to figure out.
Well, something we can certainly talk about. And again, that we have a complete blank slate here. We are starting from scratch and from nowhere and everywhere all at the same time. So any ideas are welcomed.
And
Yes,
is there
oh, sorry, go ahead.
A particular street, I mean, just because of second Sundays on King Street, is that an easier one to get going? I mean, again, I'm all about the low-hanging fruit, and then we try it for 4 different weekends or something like that.
King Street may be both the easiest and the most difficult and complex all at the same time. I think Meg is laughing because she's probably going to agree with that. But yeah, King Street is something we're going to need to look at. And I think Alan has something he can share with us on that, depending on time. So
Great. The last thing I'll just add is just give me homework. Tell me what I need to do.
well, we're going to give everybody homework. I've got some in
Okay.
mind. Doc, I
thanks.
saw your hand up. Yes, sir.
So just to go on that, I mean, there are things that we have experience with. So we have experience and study on King Street. So we already have that as a historic in terms of, we already know, at least for on Sundays, what happens with that. I mean, the other thing to think about is it's not just restaurants, it's also businesses. Hopefully they could potentially pull out into the street as well, put little kiosks or something out there, because they're going to have to limit the number of people that come into their stores. And then the other thing is the whole connectivity and mobility thing. And I'm going back to the Ashley River Bridge. I mean, we were almost there as a temporary thing, and whether that is something to revisit. Again, the study's been done, all the info is there. And then the last comment is just looking at
I love that you just brought that up, by the way. That
I
is
just got
awesome.
PTSD.
Sorry. And then the last comment, just looking at pictures of parklets, I'm not a fan. It just looks dangerous, and I'm not sure how comfortable people will be. Personally, I don't think I'd be tremendously comfortable.
All right. Any other member of the committee as we go around who has yet to weigh in?
I have a few comments, if I may.
Matt, is that you?
Can you hear me? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's me. Can you hear me okay?
Kind of.
Okay, so,
A little closer, it's better.
okay, well, I don't know if my headphones are working right, but
That's better.
anyway, I've got a couple questions. Katie, I know you sent an email last night, which I appreciate. It was Charleston Moves has obviously gone through a complicated and thorough process to get input, and I guess the question would be, you know, is there going to be an opportunity to compare that to the city's list, and does the city have a comprehensive list like yours that we can cross-reference and then identify low-hanging fruit from, both comparing ownership, but then also the realistic possibility of creating open streets on those streets. That's one question. Another question is, what are the advantages of a full closure versus a one-way scenario? It sounds like full closure might be advantageous because it could be less policed at control points versus setting up blockades or barriers along parking spaces. And then, you know, I think it's a great opportunity to do any and all of the above, as long as there's a way around. You know, I guess my question is, a lot of the comments that had come up on Charleston Moves list, I have to admit, I didn't read the survey, and I'm not a business owner, so I can't possibly relate to what the issues are. The issues that they not only can they not get enough people in their space, but also that there's not enough room to circulate on the street itself. Is it all the above? Whoever has answers to those questions, I'd appreciate any insight.
Well, I guess we'll let Katie start, then I can give you some city perspective, or Keith can.
Okay.
So we learned a lot of really interesting stuff that got us thinking about things that we hadn't thought about before. One of the things that we learned through the business owners and patrons is there are yoga and bar and other sort of boutique studios where, because of social distancing, they can't flesh out their classes in person. So they are losing money. They're hemorrhaging money. So we had a yoga studio that asked, you know, how can I start to host classes on the street? And in thinking about it, and again, our survey obviously was not, we didn't get nearly the number of business owners weighing in that we wanted to, but we did sort of narrow in on that hot spot on King between Cannon and John, based on who responded. And then another business owner in that hot spot reached out to me this morning. But it seems like based on the needs and based on the comments that we got from the different types of businesses, we could even do it where, and this is forgetting about like agency requirements and all that other stuff, just purely looking at business functionality and people moving through. You could have it where in the morning, you've got like a yoga studio or the 2 yoga studios do their morning classes in this closed off segment of the street. Then lunch starts and you've got the restaurants who have control of it, still allowing bike ped to move through. And then one of the comments we got from a retail merchant was they just simply need safer ways for their customers to walk to the store. On King Street particularly, this one business moved to King Street and the uptick in walk-ins was huge. And they see these open streets opportunities as a way to have their customers get to the retail store safely. And that mirrors what we saw from just the general public. And also, I don't know if you all saw this in the newspaper, but a follower of ours who's a data analyst, she looked at the open source sidewalk data from the city, not just on the peninsula, citywide. There are very few places where people have enough space on our existing sidewalks and can also socially distance. There's just not that 6 foot width. People have to go in the street right now if they're walking. So all of that sort of, those were the trends that sort of we were able to pull together from who weighed in on the surveys.
All right, so here we are at 6:30. Yeah, go ahead. I saw somebody, Matt. Yeah, go ahead.
Did Keith have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, just the city perspective, just for 2 seconds. We're kind of in a holding pattern. I mentioned earlier how many different entities of the city that would have to come together to make something happen. So obviously there's conversations a number of us have had. There's preliminary work that Civic Design has done for Open King Street that actually was work that was happening, was not an effect of COVID-19, right? It's very much connected to the work that Meg and planning have been thinking about for cleaning up Upper King Street, ways to spruce it up and otherwise, and a number of things along that corridor all the way up King Street have come up for potential of infrastructure change and what that could look like. So before COVID-19, that was something that was being thought about. But outside of that example, we're in a holding pattern because, again, to be able to execute any of these varying different options doesn't sit with either one of our departments. It would require us to bring others together to be able to make happen. And so I think we're in a position where, now thanks to Councilmember Brady, bringing to you all, getting clear recommendations of potential areas, getting that vetted from TNT, and then staff being activated to begin to execute on. Because again, that means people putting down other stuff to say, let's make this happen. And right now, people have been picking up COVID-19 emergency things up until this point, which is recovery, moving into a new mode, opening back up our city and otherwise. So that's kind of where our piece is right now. Obviously ready to go, at least on the TNT planning, and I think we have CPD on the line too. But yeah, that's kind of where we are from a city staff standpoint.
I sort of feel like if you can get past the political and regulatory hurdles of doing open streets during a pandemic, you could easily accomplish the same thing or keep that pattern when we're in a completely healthy state. In other words, if businesses can remain viable throughout the situation, then it would probably work when we're all fine and well.
I think that's a really, really good point that we need to keep in mind. And my suspicion is, well, first off, we're not going to spend all this time when we could be doing something else, but not doing something. I mean, I think the expectation is this committee is going to come forward with a set of recommendations that are implementable and that some, if not all, will be implemented. I mean, that we're going to do something. What it looks like, I don't know. I'm going to hand it over to Alan because I saw he had his hand up. Then I'm going to make a suggestion as I see we're into our hour. And for those of you who are new to this committee, I guess the good and bad news is having me as a chairman and me being there is I try to keep all our meetings to an hour or thereabouts to be respectful of your time. We got a lot of work to do. We're not going to get it all done tonight. So hour is our number. Alan, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to mention something that Keith brought up, which is that our work on King Street predated COVID-19. And the reason why that came through was the mayor did a walk, and Meg and her group have been looking at it for a little while. And it was just kind of a thought, can we replicate what we're doing down south of Calhoun, maybe one night a month north of Calhoun? Because what we were seeing was a lot of sidewalk congestion, particularly at night, and the kind of pedestrian automobile conflicts that caused, particularly as pedestrians try to cross in the middle of the block, and Ubers are trying to drop off even though they're not supposed to, things like that. It gets very chaotic. And then we combine that bar scene on the sidewalk and the queuing of lines with people trying to walk by in groups, you have a great deal of traffic, of sidewalk congestion. Now, as an urban designer, I think sidewalk congestion is a really great thing. It's a signal of a place that's really working. But King Street's pretty narrow in terms of its sidewalks. And so we had a problem before the pandemic with not having enough space for people. And King Street was an intense version of that, but we've got that problem all over our city, where we've allocated too much physical space in the public realm to the movement and storage of private automobiles. And I'm not anti-car, that's not the point. The point is that we probably need to find opportunities to relax and to sort of create the mode shift that we need to be able to use our city more effectively. And so this is a conversation for COVID, certainly, but this is also a conversation, as Matt was alluding to, for how we maybe do things with our streets moving forward for the next few years. I see kind of three areas, maybe four, where we can really make a difference here. And all of them were outlined by Keith. Number one, I think we could probably think about some tactical urbanism moves like curb extensions and things like that to kind of create a little bit more sidewalk space, particularly where there are sight distance triangles and intersections where people are naturally kind of stopping to wait for a place to cross, and that therefore could, be locations where people might congregate too closely together in a pandemic situation. The other thing is to rethink how we're dealing with curbside space in general. We did a great job, with mobilizing to allocate on-street parking space and look at our loading zones and things like that to better enable restaurants to do curbside. Well, we've also found ways to use those for bicycle parking in the past. And parklets are no exception. And parklets, to me, there are two ways of doing those. Number one is a temporary parklet. That's where you get, some concerns about adjacent roadway traffic and speeds and a little bit of danger. And then there's a more permanent parklet situation that's been done in cities for over a decade at this point, where there are actually constructed platforms that are physically separated from traffic. And those are making a resurgence in the COVID environment as well as way to accommodate social distance and expand sidewalk space. And then finally is what we should really be talking about is temporary street closure. And when we look at street closure, we really caution against any permanent street closure. There was a lot of permanent street closures to create pedestrian malls in the 60s and 70s, and a lot of those didn't quite work out so well. So, I would caution us to not really say that what we're doing here is, for permanent, closure. And I don't think anybody said that. But the King Street work that we did provides a starting point to look at ways you can close the segments that we were just talking about that Katie got a lot of data out of, but also some of the other segments that Keith had on his list, really great opportunities, and we could add to that. So that's all I had to say.
Okay. All right. So, Keith, I know Keith probably wanted us to sort of get a little ahead of this and get back to council. We have a council meeting on Tuesday. The good news is for this committee, and the bad news for those of us who sit on city council, is we've just expanded our schedule over the summer to add a meeting in June and a meeting in July. So I think, Keith, before our first meeting in June, we can have a T&T meeting. What I would suggest is this. I heard Gervais say homework, and I've got a thought about that. I mean, we've all talked about our ideas and the whole idea there's low-hanging fruit out there, and I'm sure everyone has a different thought about what a recommendation from this committee might look like and what individual recommendations might look like. What I would suggest is that everybody on this committee spend some time thinking about that. We'll compile it through Keith, and we'll have another meeting sooner rather than later. I know by ordinance, we're only meeting every, quarter or month, but we can up that a little bit. And before, not next week's council meeting, but there's one a week and a half after, 2 weeks after that, we will come with a set of recommendations and a white paper to the TNT committee. Does that sound like a reasonable time frame? I just don't see us doing it tonight, and I don't want to rush it because that would be a mistake. So that's just one person in the chairman's view of the world. I'm happy to take any comment or suggestion that's contrary or in support of that.
I would just add two things in there. One is that I'll leave that one alone, but we'll probably need a vote from this committee in order to have another special meeting. So we override what's in our ordinance.
So do I have a motion for us to set another meeting prior to the next, the June city council meeting?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Second from the doc. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? The ayes have it. All right, we've moved ourselves into more work, Keith. Now let's set a time. We don't have to set the time now, but let's set a time. You know, when's the June meeting? I saw it got scheduled for like June 4th, right?
I'll follow up offline.
It was early.
Schedule.
Early.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, please. Sorry, who's?
Miss Mariana.
Oh, yes, ma'am. Sorry.
That's
Hollywood
okay.
Square. Here you go. It's the first time you've spoken. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone who is. It was great to hear everybody's comments, and just in the interest of time, I mean, I definitely am supportive of everything that's been said. I would like us to, maybe I'd love to hear about what some of the ideas for the Upper Peninsula are that the Design Center has, and also consider some, what the right hours are before we kind of get together again to talk about that, because it seems like that was a big thing at Hampton Park. I live close to Hampton Park, so I know that the hours that the Hampton Park Mary Murray is open have been a big point of contention, but remaining open for at least a period of time during the day sounds like has been a huge success. So would love to spend some time thinking about that. But I just wanted to say I wonder if there's something that can come out of tonight's committee meeting, and not as a recommendation, obviously, and as Najima pointed out, we still need to give the public an opportunity to comment on all of this. But if there is at least a vote of support for these efforts that can come out of committee, so that we can say, look, we are very much interested in doing this, and we're meeting again to put forth some more specific recommendations, that this is not something that we're coming out of this meeting with nothing because we don't think this is an important issue.
Some executive summary of some sort.
I think that's a good point. I think the fact, well, I do see from playing Hollywood Squares with you all that we have at least one, if not two members of the press that are listening in on this, one of whom has been very active in writing about this. And I think it's very clear from the comments that have been made around this screen, virtual table, that we are very interested in doing something. In fact, I think one of the first comments was, let's do something now and give us homework. So, and we'll get Keith to do an executive summary. We'll report, or Matt will report out to City Council on Tuesday that we are determined to do something. And it is our charge to bring recommendations. That's what we've been charged to do. And I don't hear anybody saying we don't accept that charge. So I don't want to vote on something there's nothing to vote on. I do think by acclamation, we can report out that this committee is committed to making recommendations back to council that are serious-minded, are implementable, and will be something that we would hope the council would take seriously. And again, by agreeing to get back together again before committee. I see a thumbs up over there. Great. That's what I intend, and I think we as a committee should do. And I think my charge as the chairman is to make sure that we report back that we are working diligently and will continue to do so. And we will have a set of recommendations really quite promptly. I mean, thinking about what we're talking about, it'll be pretty quick.
Can
Yes,
I
ma'am.
ask, just as far as from not that I'm a business owner advocate or anything like that, so I'm not purporting to speak for them, but just to get a sense of the timeline that we're working on.
We definitely need to know that.
Yeah, and knowing that business owners are, like I said, hemorrhaging money right now. And I think a lot of them are expecting some sort of pilot project to come out of this to assist somewhere. How long do you think, let's say everything goes positively, City Council takes our recommendations, says, yes, staff, go forth, implement a pilot project. How long, staff members on this call, do you think it would take for you all to turn something around? Also recognizing that we all will need to help you turn something around and get it implemented on a street segment.
I'm gonna sort of protect them a little bit on this and say that it depends what the recommendations are. And I don't want them to come out and say a day, a week, a month, depending on how broad a recommendation we make. I mean, if it's closing a segment of the street, partially, it'll be much quicker than if it's doing something that takes infrastructure, right? So I think that everyone recognizes that in the days that we live in, that being nimble and quick is good. And we've shown as a city actually that we are pretty nimble and quick. I mean, with the outdoor dining, we did it quickly. It's in the process of getting in place. So I don't think that we're going to come up with anything that's going to be that complicated. So we can do it pretty quickly. And there's the people that are out here to help do that, from interfacing with the public. I also do think that having another meeting, thinking out loud, and getting notice of that meeting so we can allow businesses to get involved in this conversation, because there's many businesses who want us to do some things that take away, or not take away, but give more opportunities to mobility and, you know, allow streets to be open more to other things other than cars. There are some people who don't have great thoughts about that, and they need to be heard, for sure. So Keith, have you been looking at your calendar diligently up there?
Yeah, but I'll follow via email in terms of schedule, and try to get that. I'll try to work on that tomorrow. So
Can I just make sure that Katie's point was, I think her biggest point was most addressed. What I hear from you, Katie, is like, we need to tell small business something in 48 hours.
Well, really more, I don't want to get bogged down in, you know, Keith has pointed out that it's 6 different departments at least that will be needed to do this. I don't want what we recommend to die because it took too many departments to turn it out. You know,
certainly.
Yeah.
So, but those people, we need to let those people know that we're doing the best we can to address what they need, and that might mean that their issues sort of kind of come to the front right now.
Right.
And that in a week we've made some recommendations.
Well, I think
hopefully
council,
something in 2 weeks could. I
think council has done their due diligence to give this committee the opportunity to send a recommendation, right? Yeah. We're not sitting at a recommendation right now. There was an opportunity tonight to do so, right? So that's the avenue to then activate city staff to be able to execute, right? The avenue right now is that a recommendation comes out of this committee to traffic and transportation, their deliberation from there to the full council and get a cosign as well there. And then that activates us as staff to execute. You know,
thank you for
similar to the curbside in a smaller way, because that cost little to nothing, and was something that my staff do all the time, put up signs. That in and of itself was still 4 different departments coming together, figuring out what was what, people putting away other priorities and saying, let's figure this out, right? And so, but that was activated once we got the go ahead, you know, from our electeds and otherwise. So the opportunity and the expediting of this begins with this committee and what you all recommend to council.
So a couple things, Katie, I mean, we're all adults here. We know what we're going to do as recommendations, and there are road bumps along the way, and we'll see how that all goes. But Keith brings up a good point, and sure, it would have been great if we'd have come up with a set of recommendations tonight. I think it would have been hasty. However, as you're thinking about what we might recommend, keep in mind the amount of workforce it takes to implement it, whether there's a cost associated with it, because all of those things will go into the mix as to whether or not it's adopted. So simple, to the point, implementable, something that can be a pilot, a pivot to a pilot, and then maybe be more permanent down the road is what we need to be looking at. And just the cautionary tale of Hampton Park, I would leave in y'all's minds that shutting down entire swaths of things is going to be difficult. Being a little more creative is going to be probably easier. I mean, I just think that's reality.
We have so much more data now and so many more data points. So that will really inform a lot of the decisions. I don't want to belabor this, but the educator and the daughter of educators in me is coming out. All I want to say is that we need at least a consistent structure with which this information is collected so that we're all starting on the same basis as far as what we report about our ideas. And I see a couple of head shakes, so I can take, here I go making more work for myself. I can take the lead in developing a form that the committee can fill out and that we return when our chair determines that those things come back.
I mean, I see Alan saying that's fine. I mean, that's not a bad idea. That's in fact, it's a good idea. Just sort of give some structure to your thought process. Don't be limited though. If you think of things that go beyond any form, do it. We got to be nimble on this one and got to move. I mean, we got to get something out there and get people thinking so we can get back to it pretty quickly.
Okay.
Keith and Mike, is there any benefit to, speaking of, kind of homework other than our thought process that we have for our homework? Are there areas that, sections of King Street that we should, and Katie too, that some of us should just, get on the phone and call on those business owners and gauge their temperature? Some of them are responding, obviously, and getting involved. Others may not. I mean, so, can we get into collecting data firsthand?
I think that we've already got that resource in Meg because she is interfaced with the King Street crowd a lot. And if you've got questions, I would suggest emailing or calling Meg before you start engaging other business owners, because I feel very confident that she's going to have an answer for you on a particular business and their views of the world.
I can give you a number. I can tell you for that section of King Street that we're talking about, that Cannon to John section, about 15 restaurants have said that they'd be interested so far.
Okay.
What was that area again? I'm sorry.
King Street between Cannon and John.
Okay.
Okay. So with that, Keith, any thoughts about another meeting, or you send something out tomorrow?
Yeah, so I'm preparing to send out to you all, per the chair's request, the two public comments, and then also a PDF of my presentation.
Great.
And it just hit me. I'll send you the notes with the links in there too. And then on tomorrow, I'll just work with my staff about scheduling to get with you all and just make sure we're good to go for a June date.
Okay.
You and Councilmember Brady, y'all wanted it before the first June meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
We'll do a G&T meeting then, and then we can report out to council.
Yeah, I think it's June
not that
9th.
far in the future, because we went from one meeting in June. We added a second one over the objection of some of us, including me. So we're having a pretty early June meeting.
I think it's June 9th.
Okay, perfect. So the other thing I would say as you're doing your homework, it's a little bit like, if you decide to run for office and your next door neighbor tells you don't do it, don't. Ask your neighbors, ask the people you see every day what your ideas with your ideas, see what they think of them, because that will be a pretty good indication of what people are thinking out there. Because look, Charleston has not been one that's been fast to change on all this, and now's the time to do it. So let's go see what we can do. All right. Okay, with that, I'm going to call for us to adjourn a little later than we'd like to. We'll look to hear from Keith tomorrow. We'll put together a general sort of thought process form for ideas to submit. We'll do it as a clearinghouse. And look, we all know how to find each other, bounce ideas off each other. That's great. The only thing we can't do is meet as a group officially without putting out there publicly, but you're certainly free to talk amongst yourselves and share your ideas. And if we can come up with some thoughts that are consensus thoughts before our next meeting, fantastic. That would be great. And I'm sure there'll be others that will be in your ear about it too. Like I said, I can see who's listening in tonight. So we'll be hearing from some public people, from the public, I'm quite certain.
Council members, if you can stay on after the meeting.
We'll do it. We're about to be taken to the woodshed, y'all. All right. All right, with that, thank you all. Have a great Memorial Day weekend. Stay safe and stay sane. And thank you for your hard work on this very important committee on these very important issues. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.
All right, we're still here. But I don't want to be for much longer.
That's right.
Hold on a second. Are some of you logged in via your cell phones?
I'm not.
Nope.
Okay, give me a second.
There you go.
We had two people on the phone who were trying to linger.
Keith, remember to stop recording too.
Yeah, hold on. Good call.